Good morning, good morning, good morning, people of YouTube. This is David's Life and Observation with your host, David Welch. And I am going to do another Creative Cast here soon. The reason I haven't really been ramping up on my podcast is, largely due to just, the extreme activity on my part doing other things. I mean, it's hard to find a really good balance, as a single entity to ensure that you get everything done, including podcasts. The last podcast that I talked on was the coronavirus and a few incidents that, are kind of note. Two big things that I wanted to cover today is the continuance of the coronavirus and the impact that that's having on a lot of markets. The coronavirus is a big deal. So to say that it's not is not factual. But is it as severe as other sicknesses that have occurred, like H1N1 or swine flu or other forms or iterations of pandemic-like things that could affect us? It's not up there. Honestly, there's a higher mortality rate, higher. Now, the thing about the coronavirus is that thing spreads actually pretty quickly, and the symptoms don't really start showing up until like you're already 14 days into it. So it's no wonder that a lot of people may not even know that they have coronavirus and they are passing it to friends and family. But with that said, if you do get it, or if you do feel any sort of sickness, it is advantageous to just, go to the hospital, not necessarily be placed on quarantine, because there's a lot of people in quarantine right now, and it does make sense. Like, obviously, nobody wants to be restricted in their movement. As far as doing a medical martial law like Italy, that to me is moronic. I don't agree with that. But if you do want to stifle a spreading sickness, I do understand it. But freedom's freedom. And Italy's really not a free country. I mean, they never really have been. They have freedom-like qualities for sure, but they're not free. Not like Americans should be free. With that said, the coronavirus is a big deal. If you do feel any sort of sickness, I encourage you to seek medical attention. Do not try to self-medicate at home. Honestly, that will get you and your friends and family fucked up more than anything. So focus on getting medical attention if you feel like you are getting sick, because the last thing anybody wants is to be sick or be a number or be a statistic as far as like, oh man, I got coronavirus, and it's not just that. Like with the elderly, it has a decently high mortality rate. It's like it's growing as far as affecting the elderly. The youngest person so far as an adult that has been affected has been 35, as far as we know. Or as far as mortality rates go, everybody else seems to have been pretty good at beating it out. But outside of coronavirus, and yes, let's talk about how it affects the market. A lot of people should have seen this coming. Usually when there is a major flu or major strain or thing that's going around, the first thing that happens is the market in certain areas will be rattled. Like Lysol and disinfectant people and people concerned about super hygiene or super disinfecting or super like germ killing items, they're happy as fuck right now because they're experiencing a boom. Toilet paper is experiencing an unprecedented boom right now, and it's fine, and it's great. other areas are extremely low, whereas, it creates an imbalance in the market. But this was predictable as far as seeing an effect like something like this affecting the market. So it actually was predictable. For people not to pull money out of certain areas, I totally understand that you didn't. You probably lost your ass a little bit, but not really. There will be a bounce back. We're going to get through the coronavirus. We're going to get through this iteration of sickness, this pandemic level event. And when that happens, we're going to come out the other side and the market's going to rebalance. In fact, it'll probably shift to the positive a little bit for a while as kind of a bounce back. So, like, if you lost your ass right now, it'll equalize, if not, like, shoot past that mark in the intervening months ahead. So it's okay. But the scare, if you were smart and you were doing short-term stocks or short-term trades, you could have benefited in the sense that selling certain stocks would have been, and it came consequently as several CEOs stepped down. So that imbalance in the market was largely due to other factors as well. So some of those factors in the market include major CEOs step down, Bob Iger, so when there's like kind of a hazy future for a company, people don't like it. Now, Disney's absolutely fucking fine. There's nothing that's going to affect Disney here in the near future. Speaking of Disney, if you have not seen Pixar's Onward, do it. Go see Pixar's Onward. It is a fantastic family film. It gets you emotional like that. Like, it's a good, solid story. Now, when it comes to the after effects of the market, we're going to see a bounce back and things are kind of level and they're going to be kind of normal. But then you're going to have an overproduction of certain items that are going to kind of flood the market, toilet paper being one of them. Another thing that'll be affected, and then you're going to see a large boom or reinvestment in their stock because they don't want to run into the same issues again. So, like, they're going to have storage for toilet paper for the next century if they do it right. But when it comes to other things of note in the world, one of the things that is pretty significant constitution-wise in the United States, Almost Park, Texas is kind of a well-to-do component of Texas. So if a lot of people don't know where Almost Park is or what it's about, there are a lot of rich, white, crispy Americans living in Almost Park, Texas. And their police chief is, for lack of a better word, a tyrant. If you live in that community and you have money, you're okay. You're going to be fine. If you're outside of that community, they will terrorize the shit out of you. And this has been seen, if you type in Almost Park, Texas on YouTube, you're going to see a litany of videos that are indicative of what I'm talking about. Just type in Almost Park arrest. You'll see like a lot of videos. So what happened this weekend was there was a Second Amendment rally. Because of the excess, abuse from the police chief there. He has been sued, and they are working their way through the courts to really go after that community. And there are several lawsuits lined up for Almost Park. They're almost as bad as, like a few other areas in Texas that have really bad police problems. And the police problem essentially is the over-enforcement of laws on those who are using their rights. And by using their rights, they have somehow made an enemy of that law enforcement community. And we see this time and again. We see it with different communities. We see it in California quite a bit. We see it not so much in Arizona, not like you would see, not like there would be like an overabundance of activists here. There's not. There's a handful, no lie on that one, but there's a growing number, and the volume in Arizona is growing, but Texas has a huge quantity of First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment activists, Fifth Amendment advocates. We see it a lot there. Florida's, getting up there. New York has their certain guys, and essentially all over the country, we're seeing more and more interactions with law enforcement that don't go the way they should. And here's what I mean. If somebody literally is doing nothing and they're not doing anything violent, they're not breaking the law, we see an overreaching hand of law enforcement, especially on the tail end of red flag laws, which was caught on video the other day. But you see an attack on the American people by Americans, and it's not great, and it's definitely something to speak out against. Because what the law enforcement community does not realize, and they probably don't care about, is that the people they are hurting and affecting are people just like you and me. And they're going to inadvertently one day kick off, mayhem, and they're not going to be ready for it. And they think they're ready for it, but they're not really ready for the mayhem that they're going to start. And it's something that's avoidable. Enforce just laws. Enforce laws that have victims. Do not sit there and terrorize the community over a plant, especially we've gotten to the point in this country where marijuana should be legalized on a federal level for either recreational use or medical use. A lot of people are like, oh, okay, I can see medical, but the medicinal use doesn't stop the recreational users. They're still going to have recreational users, just like we have recreational alcohol people, which has more of a dramatic effect on society than marijuana, and that's proven. We have the marijuana advocates and community really doing a good job of pushing, the data and pushing the information that, speaks to their point that, we've reached a critical juncture in our history that, the plant itself has a variety of uses. In fact, we can use hemp and CBD, and it's just, like I said, it's making a reversion as far as the marijuana community is concerned. Other hard drugs, I don't know about, I do understand about restricting people's ability to have access to it, but it should be done in a medical facility, not in a jail setting where numerous people have died from very preventable things. So there was a young lady in North Carolina who was flat out disregarded, disrespected, and ultimately she paid for it with her life. Her drug use habit cost her life. She started telling jail staff, my heart, I have chest pain. This went on for days. She suffered for days. And then, ultimately she died, and then they wanted to have this reaction of, oh, we didn't know. Nah, bitch, you knew. Don't try to lie, because what inmates are really good about doing lately, and this should kind of be a thing, is they're absolutely willing to testify against COs. COs make a myriad of mistakes, and I honestly believe if someone dies in jail from something preventable, not only should those immediate COs that were watching her be subject to arrest and imprisonment themselves, but the sheriff should absolutely have handcuffs, if the sheriff is in charge of the jail, should absolutely have handcuffs thrown on them as well, saying, you know what, hey, you failed this person in such a way that it cost them their life. So honestly, you should be handcuffed and, you know, thrown in jail as well. When it comes to other things, you know, of course, the level of disrespect towards people in our penal system is at an all-time high. There are people that are blatantly racist that run our prison system. There are people that are that really don't have a care for human life. And here's what I mean. There are sheriffs that have been known to do legal embezzlement. So they have literally denied food money to inmates to line their own coffers. And if you think it's not true, for those who are pro-police, and I'm not saying I'm not pro-police, what I am saying is I'm against bad cops. And there are a lot of unfortunately, there's a lot of bad cops out there, because if you are not arresting those in your ranks for breaking the law, then you are a bad cop. I don't care if you have, you know, really good interactions with your community. I don't care if you don't ticket everybody. Honestly, you're a bad cop if you knowingly know that a fellow cop has committed a severe crime against someone and not doing anything about it. There needs to be quicker, more immediate, more strenuous things happening to law enforcement when they commit crimes. Not just, you know, I get 90 days of paid leave, because that's vacation. That is an extreme amount of vacation that they're okay with. The tide would turn if they were immediately incarcerated. So they commit a crime against someone, their movements restricted, access to families restricted, access to the food they like restricted. I mean, once that starts happening, you will have a much better turnout for law enforcement. I guarantee it. You're going to have a stronger bond with the community if you weed out bad cops. Nobody likes to see an arrest. Arrests are ugly. Arrests are not always necessary, but when they are necessary, they are ugly, or can be. They don't have to be ugly if that person doesn't resist, and they need to really stop it on the whole, like, hey, if you move just slightly, that's resisting. People have a natural reaction to being grabbed and touched. They do. To say that you have to just be limp and let them do whatever and then they still punch you in the face, no, I don't agree with that. If you got 6 individuals on one person, you got one person cranking on one thing, another person cranking on another, the other person's tasing them. Like, there is no plausibility for that person to not have a movement or reaction that affects the arrest. It just seems to be fucking lost on law enforcement that's a thing. In fact, with every arrest, there's like a really high probability that resisting is always added as a charge. And there are people that have been arrested that haven't fucking moved, that have resisting added to their list of charges because they said something that the officer doesn't like. The whole thing about recording law enforcement or government officials. I don't know at what point or how many lawsuits it's going to take to get officers in line with the fact that don't fuck with photographers or videographers. This is not the UK. This is not, a police state. We live in the United States of motherfucking America. And it is not okay for you to run up to a photographer or videographer and fuck with them. If they're in a place they're allowed to be, doing something they're allowed to do by the Constitution, then don't fuck with them. And I'm getting tired of the narrative of, we're just, since 9/11. Like, nah, bitch. Like, that honestly doesn't work. That does not work. I mean, the 9/11 crew, they didn't have cameras and shit that they were doing. I mean, what did they surveil? They went in, they actually, became pilots and then organized that way. Fuck you mean, like, surveillance, like taking, video. I mean, people can use the video. Well, change your tactics every once in a while, dumbass. You know, I mean, we learn in the military to have multiple levels of threat conditions, but that doesn't include your ability to restrict other people's freedom. You know, like if you want the whole martial law scenario, or if you want to be the, you know, the king shit when it comes to law enforcement, you affect other people's freedom, then you are a terrorist. There are veterans out here that took an oath to defend America against, you know, enemies foreign and domestic. That whole domestic component includes law enforcement. You know, a lot of people are like, man, you know, and I always think it's funny because law enforcement are like, man, you know, nobody ever, you know, changed with, you know, violence or resisting. We're founded on a country that was violent and resisted, you know, a police state. So just know we're a generation of people that, you know, have seen war a lot of our lives. A lot of us have been to war and came back to only have the terrorists win because somebody can have their feelings hurt, or somebody can think they have the power to get people arrested on the street, and they don't. Or in a public lobby. If you're in a public lobby and you know, a place of business, a place of business that's not private. If it's like a government building, yeah. So if you're in a government building and it's paid for by the people, people have absolute ability to be there and record their dealings with the government. Because if they don't record or document in some way their interactions with the government can turn around and say, hey, I never serviced that person, or I never did X, Y, Z. And then if you have the footage to prove otherwise, then you can weed out bad people in government. That's exactly what you do. Now, I have seen some really positive results, you know, in places like certain places in Utah, certain places in Colorado, certain places, you know, all over where, you know, government officials, some get it. Some are like, man, you know, hey, they're allowed to record. They're allowed to come in here and, you know, do what they need to do. And then, you know, there are some, and I see a progressive trend the other direction. So lawsuits are working, just not as quickly as people want them to. And there absolutely should be more lawsuits that really regulate our government entity of law enforcement and, you know, like at large. I don't believe, honestly, that we need to get to the point where, and I've said this before in videos, like where I'm like, death to them all, you know, fuck the government, you know. I've been that person, and I've been, you know, my attitude has been like, dude, you should be fucking hung for the treason you do. But does it need to get to that level? Not necessarily. It really doesn't, because we are seeing a change. It's just not at the pace we want. If we wanted quicker change, the violence would work, but it would cost a lot of lives. With the inclusion of the red flag laws, that kind of disrupted a lot of people's peaceable method of going about change, because people are absolutely terrified of armed men in the name of law enforcement coming through their door or windows or whatever have you, pointing guns at them and telling them what they can and cannot do. No. Bad law enforcement, don't do that. Bad governments, don't do that. Should there be severe penalties for that? I believe so. But by and large, a lot of people are like vehemently against that red flag law. Is it being enforced in some areas already? Yes. Are communities under the belief that they can simply call law enforcement if that person doesn't do or acquiesce to what they want them to do in a public setting? We see it all the time, where a business will call law enforcement, hey, these guys are out filming my property, I don't understand why, and they're scary. Like, you're a dumb bitch, because there are cameras everywhere. And what is the first thing a law enforcement officer does when they come up to you? They're fucking they have a camera, they have a body camera, saying, dude, I'm recording too, like, what's your deal? And a lot of people are under this belief, and I hope people watch this video and get educated, because not enough people are educated on this. People don't need your permission to film in a public place. They don't. They don't need permission to film your kids. They don't need permission to film your granny. They don't need permission to film you whatsoever. Now, is it nice to get permission to film and, but to feel that you have a power over someone that they don't have your permission, or that they, I don't know where that came about, or what kind of asshole you need to be in order to not understand the Constitution on that level. And there are some people in very small groups that are getting educated in this, but not enough. So we need to get to the point where everyone's educated on it. Everybody should, go back to school, as far as, or schools need to stress this enough. Like, there needs to be a level of Constitution taught in class across America in high school that showcases how people can utilize their rights to defend themselves from a tyrannical government entity. But schools themselves are tyrannical government entities a lot of the time. And if students learn about the law, they're going to use it against the school. Because schools, by and large, get away with a lot of bullshit. Like, so much bullshit. And a lot of people feel protected in the school system because they've been able to get away with it for years, getting away with, talking shit about students, talking shit about the military, talking shit about X, Y, and Z, because the exchange of ideas is something that's absolutely okay. But when you start imposing restrictions on people, and I get handbooks, like if a student's blatantly not following the handbook, hey, you agree to these terms prior to, entering that school. If you don't like the system, do school at home. Find a different mechanism of school if you want more freedom in that sense. But when you go to a public school, there kind of has to be these general guidelines, because, in the past, like, gangs have formed and things have become terrible when it comes to bullying and stuff like that. So I do understand, hey, we're not going to allow you to wear gang t-shirts, or we're not going to allow you to wear, bandanas in class, or, or even hats. Some schools go real hard in the paint against hats because of what's on the hats, and it could be totally innocuous to you. You're like, it's just a hat, but, it could represent to somebody else something stupid, like, man, why you wearing purple, man? You a Latin king, something stupid. And other people, and just run on the general premise that people are stupid. And if you're, in high school, you're dealing with somebody, even if you're a high schooler that has high intelligence, you may be dealing with somebody that is not highly intelligent, or that has just a very basic disregard of human decency and understanding. And your freedoms as a minor are somewhat restricted, and you just got to be cognizant of that. However, parents, on the other hand, and we see this all the time where, like, I'm sorry, but if I see my minor son, 5, 6, 7 years old, handcuffed by a school resource officer, the level of rage and anger generated from that will be a monsoon or a tornado or a hurricane compared to other parents. Because no one, unless they're doing severe amount of violence and property damage, should be even restrained. And I don't understand why law enforcement hasn't learned safe restraints. Like, why is it that the mental health community has to go through courses on safe restraints, but the law enforcement community does not? They, like, punch in the face. They fucking do everything they can to yield compliance, but it's a lot easier to do if you are armed with basic restraints, armed with basic things that you can do instead of punching and kicking. Like, bro, 90% of the reason cops don't have their asses handed to them is twofold. One, they're armed with multiple weapons. Two, they can't fucking fight. They can't fight. And they're doing it to exert some sort of control over someone that is not beating their ass back because they're afraid of the charge. They're afraid of the resisting arrest charge. They're afraid of more consequences for resisting an officer. So 90% of the time they don't have their asses handed right back to them is because that person is afraid to catch other charges. And I get that. you should absolutely, do your best to not, resist an arrest. And, when you resist an arrest, and you're not armed with equal or better weaponry, then, you do run the risk, like this gentleman in California, you run the risk of being shot in the head. It's exactly what happened to this gentleman. He was resisting arrest, and he was just out wrestling. Honestly, he was just out wrestling two grown men. One of the officers' guns fell. He claimed that the young man who was actually complying at that point was trying to go for his gun. So the other officer put his gun to that person's head and shot him. That's a bad shoot all day. Honestly, if you're getting your ass handed to you, why don't you create some distance, use tasers, or, hey, get way better at being able to keep yourself out of harm's way in wrestling or jiu-jitsu and go that route. Honestly, arrests themselves would savagely decrease if officers weren't armed. And then the likelihood of people being killed if our officers were disarmed, if they weren't walking around kitted up like you wouldn't believe, like we were in, Iraq and Afghanistan, and you literally telling people, that they will arrest them violently or with the intent of violence if they don't just acquiesce and give them the information or say anything, or be arrested pleasantly. If you are being arrested and you're unjustifiably being arrested, people are allowed to resist to the point where they can take that officer's life. And I don't think officers are really too cognizant of that fact. In fact, they will tell you to your face, oh, it's just unwise, or it's just you shouldn't resist an officer. Like, I don't know, there's a two-part component to that. Like, I'm sorry, if you didn't do anything wrong and you're being manhandled by grown men or punched in the face or, whatever, you should absolutely resist. I mean, I wouldn't make it easy for you. Do you think my level of fight? My level of fight depends on the situation. If you're unarmed, I'm going full bore. If you're armed and your buddy's armed, I'm gonna wiggle. I'm definitely not gonna let you just beat on me. But I'm not gonna go to the point where I'm trying to reach for your gun or even play that. I'm sorry, but I'm not getting shot in the head by an idiot. You know what I mean? But at the same time, if I'm armed and I'm kitted up, those cops most likely would not fuck with you. If they tried to fuck with you and you shot them, there'd be, a motorcade, and there's all sorts of stuff that happens when cops die. Like, I don't agree with that. Honestly, if you're a law enforcement officer and you died because you were a shitty human being and you tried violating someone's rights or break the law, nobody should go to your funeral. I don't care. Do not give a fuck. Nobody should go to your funeral. And that's just the way that should be. I mean, the law enforcement community needs to recognize bad apples in their own, and they always, all their good and bad officers that have died in the line of duty, but they always turn it around and say, oh man, he was a great officer, he was outstanding, he got commendations, whatever. Doesn't mean he's not committing crimes. Doesn't mean he's not trying to violate people's rights. And he got his ass handed to him. And we're seeing more and more where that is the case. So officers are more on edge now because they're afraid of people actually fighting back. But in order to mitigate this altogether, law enforcement community, I'm sorry, but if you don't start taking swifter action sooner and battling, the bad eggs in your department, it's gonna continue to get worse for you. Anyways, I digress. I do love everybody. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. The coronavirus, like I said, do your due diligence. There was a fluctuation in the market. We did see that coming, and be smart with your money, but also know that there's going to be a bounce back from this. If you lost your ass, it's okay, because it's about to come flying right back up. So if you sold at the right time and you can buy at the right time, the upward stroke is coming. Probably in the next week or so. So you're going to see an upward stroke. Now, when it comes to the law enforcement community, or you got government entities that are just not used to the change, or the lawsuits are not coming quick enough. Just ensure that that you've reached a level of chaos with people, that they're no longer dealing with it, just laying over and allowing it. You see it all the time in the news. People are fighting back against law enforcement. Yes, they're outgunned. Yes, they're significantly most likely going to lose their life in the exchange, but people are just not folding to the presence of tyranny. And if it gets bad enough, it'll go badly for everybody. But in order to mitigate that, government, please, 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 don't pass stupid laws, and don't try and take people's rights away. That's where you get yourselves in hot water. And if you have a bat apple in your apartment,